Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1050 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. I want it known, guys, that as a YouTuber, as a anime, manga, One Piece public commentator, moments like these are the ones that I both like and I dislike the most. On one hand, I have the opportunity to say something different that I feel like goes against the grain, which is, if you're not aware, that is what I do. That is what I like to do. Everybody likes it. Okay, well, let's find the one thing to critique. Oh, everyone hates it. I'll find the thing that I like, or say something in a new way. That's what I do. Find some sort of connection maybe you hadn't considered. I dislike saying what everybody else is saying, because chances are pretty good that if everybody else is saying it, there's somebody who's doing it better than me. This is my one skill, man. Play to your strengths. On the other hand, there is such a thing as going against the grain too much. If I'm constantly trying to put thoughts in your head that may not have been there beforehand, there's a great chance that these thoughts are going to be disagreeable. And potentially, in some cases, like our current case, potentially dangerous. Not for me, but for the story. Like, there's serious merit to just sort of like sit down, shut up, and read and let Oda do his thing rather than try to analyze it and be constantly wrong. And then create expectations in people that inevitably are not met, and then they too are disappointed. I'm aware of this. I try. With great power comes great responsibility. But as it always is, I'm just gonna speak my mind. And y'all can evaluate afterwards if it makes any sense. The end of this chapter makes me so excited to see where we go from here. The conversation after the end of the last chapter was basically, is Kaido going to get up or not? And I'm here to tell you guys that if you want to cling on to the hope that Kaido will get back up, do not invest in that. Personally, I still think that it is a topic of debate and conversation. But there's a difference between like a conversation, a hypothetical, a what if, or this would be cool, and this has to happen. I think that anybody who takes that too far is just, you're asking for immeasurable disappointment. And maybe I should be more clear. I think that evidence suggests strongly that Kaido will get back up. But will the battle continue is, I guess, more so the question. I feel one of the struggles with weekly reading is getting a firm grasp on Oda's vision as it is occurring. And you could say, well, maybe that's not important, but I do think it's important with weekly readers because we have so much time to hypothesize and speculate and theorize and think about the story and where it might be going. I think the more natural state when reading any kind of story is reading it successively. Because there's a big difference between the impression that the story is trying to give you and your interpretation of that. And a lot of times as we analyze these chapters over and over a long period of time, it starts to blur the lines between what the story is actually trying to do, how it's trying to make you feel, and how you actually feel. But obviously, as I spend the vast majority of my time speculating, I kind of have to find a way to organize and make sense of these two worlds simultaneously. And so with this being said, this story very clearly follows the flow of the last several, pretty much ever since Luffy went Gear 5th, right? The overall feeling that we should have as readers, or that Oda intends for us to have as readers, is for us to be caught up in this battle and Luffy's victory. From Kaido being punched into the earth in the last chapter to where we are now, at essentially the celebration phase. Now, full disclosure, I could not invest properly in these moments because I did not believe that it would be the end of Kaido or the end of the battle. And so in some respects, you kind of gotta speak in like third person, like hypothetically, if I had bought this, does it work? And I think the answer to that is sure. With the big caveat, right, that, well, it would have been nice if I could have believed that this was Kaido's end. But the honest truth is that this perception and this state of enjoying One Piece affected the vast majority of this last chapter. It's just I'm not in the mindset, in the proper flow to actually enjoy what's going on as it's happening. That was just my reality. And not that having people agree with me makes my point any more valid, but certainly other people did experience this same thing. So if I was dumb, I was not alone. Which in my opinion is a little sad, because I think that the Yasu stuff from this chapter is about as peak as it gets when taken individually. And for everybody that was actually able to immerse themselves and get into it and feel the emotion of that, I'm somewhat jealous, because it is really that good. But the meaning that I took from this is that Yasu sacrificed his life in order to do something, to give something to his daughter. But she doesn't really understand that. All she really knows is that he was here and that he's gone, and she felt as though she needed him. She misses him. She wants to see him again. So the message on the balloon, in a very understandable way, is selfish. I would never phrase it this way, but you could say that in some respects it's a little ungrateful, because there was meaning and intention for his death. Now, I'm not saying that it isn't all right to miss people that are gone, but there's a lot of power, I feel like, from the acknowledgement, especially in this particular case, of what Yasu did for everyone. I feel as though Otoko now understands. It reminds me of all these conversations that we've had in the past about Carrot and about Pedro's death, which essentially reiterates sort of this same point that Pedro did what he wanted to do. He lived the life that he wanted to. He understood the ramifications, the risk, and still did it because that was his will. And I don't think that it's a thing that Pedro would want Carrot to regret or have regret for, or anger. This feels like the message that I resonate with. And of course, this same thing relates to a lot of what happened early in the chapter, as Luffy fell and Yamato caught him. Or as you can see him smile with the partying and everybody having joy around them. This is something I'm very familiar with as a One Piece fan. It's scenes that we have gotten many other times, and the majority of these I have enjoyed more because it felt like the end of the battle to me and I was ready for it. So there's nothing wrong with it by itself at all. But of course, chapters don't actually exist in a vacuum, and analyzing in this way only has so much value. The larger question at hand is, why did I feel as if the battle hadn't ended? And we're not going to go through all the reasons that we've done this in previous videos, but this was, I think, an emotionally incomplete fight. And of course, the other half of this is simply my expectations for the fight and things that I thought were necessary and or wanted, which may or may not be justifiable. But as a point of critique, I'm trying to be vague here so that this video doesn't stretch on forever, but as a point of critique, I do think that it falls on the author's behalf, their responsibility to create a sensible flow, or a flow that makes sense. And it's obviously never going to work for everyone always, but in this case, it was unfortunate for me. Let's actually not talk about Kaido, because I feel like Kaido is a little bit more debatable, but let's talk about how we should be feeling about Big Mom after this chapter, just based on what we're given. Now, there's some controversy as to whether or not the additional shadow that we see besides Kaido's Big Mom or his cape, but regardless, we see in the chapter that Big Mom is also pointed at along with Kaido to have gone completely through all of the island into the magma below. So Big Mom is, if we're supposed to assume that Kaido has been defeated and is dying, then we should believe the same thing about Big Mom. I'm not saying that you have to believe that, I'm just saying that is literally the impression that the chapter is trying to give you. And for obvious reasons, I think with Big Mom more so than Kaido, that is disastrously disappointing. With her crews in action, Big Mom's own last statement of "don't think me defeated," overall many of her storylines and plot lines from Whole Cake Island being unresolved, right? There's just nothing about that is satisfying. I almost feel like in order to like this at all, you literally have to believe something other than what the chapter is giving you. And again, I think this is part of the problem with the design of the scene, no matter which way you want to look at it. If it's actually true, it's very disappointing, and even if it's not true, but Oda wants to make it seem true, he is trying to literally disappoint us. But in my case, I am not disappointed because speculation, right? I'm assuming that what we're seeing here isn't real. And the end of the chapter helps a lot. But let's go into a little bit more depth. Why doesn't the Big Mom thing work, in my opinion? And so the biggest thing is that when it comes to fights, you need to feel a sense of a full progression. In fact, I think that there's some relatively well-known examples of creators going against this recently. In some Marvel films, we had the Doctor Strange movie recently. No spoilers, but there's a character that is relatively hype that exists in another multiverse, and they put on this big show of being able to fight the big bad, and then they just die, like instantly. Another example, I believe, if I remember correctly, relatively recently was the second Suicide Squad film, where you begin the movie thinking that a certain cast of oddballs are your heroes, and it's a total illusion. They go out to go fight, and you think that they're going to infiltrate and do some things, that they're the heroes, and then they just die relatively instantly. These are examples, and you can just, when you watch them, you know it feels different. These are incomplete narratives. And the reason that it works sometimes, although debatably works, is because it's meant to be a joke, right? You all understand that when you have that main cast of heroes and they're acting all tough, and then they kill themselves or they die instantly, it's like shock humor. And they only ever intended to do this with side characters that barely get any screen time, or in the case of Doctor Strange, characters that exist in some sort of alternate timeline. And so in the case of Big Mom, the last thing that we see her say is, "Don't think me defeated." And then we pan to this chapter where it's implied that she is in a magma thing and she's going to die, right? Then it's not the same thing, and I don't think that it works. If Oda is intending to make this work, it is the biggest miss I've ever seen ever. I praise Oda for creativity. You know, creativity comes with some risks, but creativity also has the potential of missing greatly. And usually I just like the attempt, but in this case it's like, conceptually, why would you even try it? It's simply not the way to end a main antagonist, a main villain that has been in the story for 5 or 6 years. It's the equivalent of give up levels of bad. So with this established, right, I refuse to believe that that is what's happening, so I assume that Big Mom is going to get out of the magma alive. And if Big Mom can do it, I think that Kaido can do it as well. I know that it's been established in the story that magma is not the same as fire or heat, but Kaido literally just used a superheating technique, is a dragon with impenetrable scales, usually in mythology, so for him to survive magma makes sense to me. And then I think from a storytelling or a narrative perspective, right? Big Mom and Kaido do get out of the magma. You could of course make it where they're like barely alive, like Darth Vader on the shore of, and half burnt, right? Oda can go that way. Or he can choose to make it hype, like they rise out of the magma like freaking Godzilla. I think between these two options, one is definitely a hit, while the other, we'll see. Another thing to point out is that even if Big Mom is still alive and escapes the magma, but is, missing her arms and legs and is just damaged to the point of no recovery, that isn't any better. Unless it's something crazy, like the Big Mom pirates get Germatech and then turn Big Mom into Mecha Zilla Big Mom or something like that, and it's just awesome, right? Like, maybe. But I suppose to keep this on topic, the speculation that I have is that both Big Mom and Kaido get out of the magma. We've talked about Kaido's awakening before. Maybe this near-death experience triggers his awakening in a very similar way that we just saw with Luffy, who died or very nearly and then he transformed. That's something that seems really cool to me. Along with that, Big Mom has soul powers. She could also awaken. We're not sure that we have seen her awakening. But even without her awakening, I think that you could imagine that Big Mom could actually make a homie out of that magma, which would just be absurd. Now, at what cost to herself could I imagine Big Mom coming out of this with a lifespan that's just basically over? Yeah, I could see that. So long as she's still an imposing figure. And this may be reaching, but to me it opens the door at least a little bit. We have some specific wording, which I find interesting. The declared victor of the rooftop battle has been revised. So they clarify it's the rooftop battle. And then later, the wording is decisive battle in the skies of Wano. This is obviously the fan translation, but the wording caught my attention as being very specific. Some other people have pointed out that Kaido is a master of land, sea, and air, so I don't know. Obviously, as I said before, I would not in any way invest in this idea because Oda has worked too hard to make this take, it destroys you if it's not what is going to happen. But I will file it away as a hope or as a pleasant surprise if it were to occur. But obviously the same problems exist with this as it did last week. Can we have Kaido and Big Mom return and be fearsome, and how will that impact the arc and how people feel about that? We only know that if we can cross that bridge. But I'm just certain that I feel as if their return would do a lot of good. Now, all this being said, let's talk about the actual flow of the chapter. It's supposed to be this hype, victorious moment. But the tone was all wrong. And it was all wrong because almost immediately, we have this victory celebration at the first half of the chapter, and then it slowly starts to become ambiguous, and then bam. You have serious concerns about the island itself. Now, the possibility exists that whatever this magma thing is going to happen is just going to perhaps open the borders, whatever that means. And every living person on the main island is going to be fine. There's no real danger, basically. While I wouldn't prefer this, I actually think that there's a lot to be intrigued about if that does happen. Specifically, Momo's conversation with Zunisha in this chapter, he says, we're not gonna open the borders, which I kind of took as Zunisha could have done something to open the borders and Momo decided against it. But instead, if the borders open because of Luffy's punch, then it kind of makes you question their understanding of what's necessary to open the borders or that circumstance. Overall, I find it interesting. If that played out, the lore aspects of it would probably draw me in regardless. But I would definitely say that I prefer outcomes that increase the tension. That's what I want to feel right now. I'm definitely ready for some post-battle excitement, even if Kaido and Big Mom are really done. Is it really likely that the entirety of the island gets destroyed? Everyone's not going to die, you don't think. It's possible Zunisha could save them and everyone lives on Zou together. I actually think that would be pretty cool. But I will say that the end of this chapter felt special to me. I obviously cannot remember every chapter and every arc of One Piece in perfect detail, but the obvious comparison to this arc as a whole is Water 7 Enies Lobby. And in Enies Lobby, right, Luffy defeated Lucci, but they still had threats remaining that they had to deal with and essentially escape from. And so the way that worked is that Luffy threw his final punch in one chapter. In the very next chapter, we get a lot of instant reactions to Luffy's win. But the tone of the chapter never actually got dark, despite the fact that there's all these enemies and stuff like that. It kept its lighthearted, positive feel all the way to the end when the Mary showed up. So I find this feeling in this arc distinctive. After Luffy defeated Kaido, there's a far more sinister edge. And it's actually this feeling at the end of the chapter which makes me more excited to read the next one than the last chapter did. But as always, we play the game of wait and see. Yet again, there's things which I want answers for, I want resolution for. And the arc is not over, so there's still the possibility that these are addressed in ways that I haven't anticipated. It's easy to say that all these things are going to resolve in a positive way because that was the tone of the first half of the chapter, but we don't know. Honestly, it doesn't matter if it's positive or not, I just want a clever solution. Like for instance with Zoro's injuries, I want that to lead into something exciting. If it's just sort of resolved and all that tension sort of puffs out as Marco just heals him, that doesn't feel too satisfying to me. So we'll judge it all at the end and do our analysis. Until then, my feeling is that I'm not satisfied with the end of Big Mom or Kaido that is suggested from this chapter, and for me it really hurt the experience of this chapter for the first half. But there are some other things to talk about which do excite me. The cover story, So it seems like, kind of like the chapter, the cover story was relatively anticlimactic because we see two shadows and we assume immediately that it's, or I did, Ichiji and Reiju. And then we have a couple more cover stories where it's kind of ambiguous and you wonder, oh, is Oda teasing this? This doesn't make too much sense to me. And then it's revealed as Reiju and Ichiji, which is what we expected from the beginning. It wasn't bad, but I wasn't overwhelmed with hype. But the interesting thing here is that if you follow the cover story, they say that somebody had arrived to Chocolate Town, but the book was taken to Whole Cake Island. We see Reiju and Ichiji obviously in Whole Cake Island rescuing Niji, but whatever happened to Chocolate Town? This is another thing that I wouldn't invest in, but you do wonder if someone else is here. And of course, lastly, we have the very end of the chapter. Momo, dragon form, transform into his adult form. We don't get to see it, but we know that we're going to see it probably in the next chapter. You hope so. So that is very exciting for me. I'm just like, this has been built up so long. I hope that he looks like Odin, but in any other form, it's kind of crazy. But stacked on top of this now is new drama about who Denjiro is referring to as the next shogun. I mentioned this very early on in the arc, but it made the most sense to me for Momonosuke to travel with the Straw Hats, and then Hiyori becomes shogun. Despite Momonosuke being older, he is still at heart and inexperienced 8 years old. So maturity-wise, and he's not ready to be the shogun. Anybody 8 years old isn't ready. You're basically a puppet leader for an extended period of time. The other thing is that Momonosuke went forward in time, while Hiyori's actually been here and experienced the trauma of the last 20 years. And while here, you can see through the guise of Komurasaki, she's embraced this prominence in some respects. Everyone in Wano already knows who she is. Obviously, the story is trying to tell you that Momo becomes the shogun. That's his entire character arc. He is here as well. That is what we are anticipating. But for me, it is a question. Particularly since Denjiro is the one to announce it and his personal connection with Hiyori. I mentioned this before, but I wanted more in the story from Denjiro because he did not really contribute much to the battle. So if he's had this plot in some way of setting up Hiyori to be shogun and there's some sort of drama involved with that, oh my god, I am for that. And while this is speculation, I think that Momonosuke would be for this as well. Despite Momonosuke's major win in moving the island, I think that he still has a lot that he wants to prove to himself. I don't think that he sees himself as Odin yet, even though he is trying. So traveling with the Straw Hats, which is what I see, could be very beneficial to him to sort of walk in Odin's path, as he did with Whitebeard and with the Roger Pirates. A lot of people are going to say it's just going to be Momonosuke, and it might very well be. But to me, because of the orientation with Denjiro literally right next to Hiyori, it adds in this question. I hope at the very least you guys can see the possible double meaning. Again, reading the fan translation, they say, "Wait, boss Kiyoshiro, where's your patented pompadour?" And he says, "Well, this is going to be a long story. Allow me to present the new shogun of Wano." There's a long story involved with both Momonosuke and Hiyori. But either way, with Momonosuke's reveal, I hope the scene delivers, and I believe that it will. But yeah, I suppose this is the last thing that I have to say. What was interesting is the last time that Luffy was defeated, nobody actually believed that Luffy was defeated, none of his allies. And that was a big focal point in the story, and they kept fighting. And so you see something interesting and similar here in this chapter, where some of the Beast Pirates don't believe that Kaido was actually defeated and are still fighting. And this is actually not resolved within the chapter. Yamato steps in like, "Wait, guys, don't, your general has fallen and we've already spared you one time." I think it's natural to assume that afterwards they would be like, "Oh, okay, we're done. Kaido's defeated, yay," or something, some sort of resolution, but it's actually skipped over. So you know that there's more here. I do think that it would be fitting if Kaido returned for his crew to have acted in the same way as Luffy's, to almost compare them, right, as contemporaries. It hypes up Kaido even more in a similar way to Luffy. Or perhaps the reverse will be true, and instead, Kaido's crew gives up which would make him anti-Luffy and kind of single out Luffy as to why he is more special and more worthy of becoming the king of the pirates. But yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on this chapter. As always, I'm curious as to what you guys think, whether you noticed something from the chapter that I might have missed. Just share your thoughts. Like the video if you liked the video, dislike the video if you disliked the video, subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content, and as always guys, have a wonderful day.